Hard to believe, but yes, we're just a few weeks away from June, which means the Canadian men will be back in action June 5th, taking on Aruba, and then June 8th, taking on Suriname in World Cup qualifiers. And just yesterday, Ollie, Suriname released their 23-man squad. Anything in particular catch your attention?
Well, there's a few new players again in this Suriname squad. There's a ton of guys in this squad that are uncapped or have fewer than 5 caps. Obviously, they've been recruiting a lot of Dutch dual nationals. But two in particular that stand out to me, Geraldo Becker, who's playing in the Bundesliga for Union Berlin, and Luciano Haps, who's playing for Feyenoord, one of the top teams in the Netherlands. So I think when you look at this squad now, I don't think I'd put them in my top 6 in CONCACAF yet. But other than that, you know, you look at Panama, you look at El Salvador, I think they're comparable to those teams, probably more talented to those teams, but maybe obviously just lacking the kind of chemistry and CONCACAF experience, having so many new players coming in. So it's going to be a real test for Canada. That being said, I think if we want to talk about 2022 and qualifying for a World Cup, Canada has got to be able to take care of this opposition on a regular basis. So that starts here with this Suriname match, and then hopefully with a two-legged tie against Haiti after that.
3 very good attacking players, which will certainly challenge Canada's back line. In Cherry, in Becker, in Hasselbank as well. They didn't receive a couple players that I'm sure that Dean Gorey wanted to bring in. Jaro Riederwald of Crystal Palace, not a part of this team. A striker named Kirk out of Utrecht. There's some good players that haven't joined up or changed their association as of yet. So on the balance, it's going to be a true challenge. The big X factor, though, Andy, is a little bit of an element of unknown. These players simply haven't played with one another. That might be a detriment to Suriname, but could be a detriment to Canada as well, because you just aren't quite sure what to expect from this group.
And you had been saying all along there's that Dutch connection as well. So 12 of these 23 players have represented the Netherlands at the youth level. So we're talking about 52% of that roster at the moment. And we know how strong that program has been. Ollie, take us through your projected 23-player roster for Canada.
Okay, so we'll start with the goalkeepers. It's the same group as the last window. I do think Max Crepeau, the way he's played for Vancouver, has jumped into the number 2 slot, if there was any doubt there, over Dane Sinclair. Defense, I've got a couple of changes. I've brought Daniil Henry back. I've brought Scott Kennedy in for the first time. They're both playing at a good level, I think, in Korea and in the German 2nd division, respectively. So they're in for Waterman, Störing, and Ferreira. Ferreira obviously just still hasn't got a club, so I think it's difficult to pick him for the biggest games right now. Midfield, the interesting ones are going to be Scott Arfield and Jonathan Osorio. You know, is Arfield still committed to playing for the program? Is he fit after having had an injury recently? If he is, then he'll come back in for sure, but we just don't know on that one right now. And then Osorio just hasn't played much. You know, he's had those kind of lingering injury issues, and I think at the minute you go with David Wotherspoon, who did play very, very well in that March window, over Jonathan Osorio, as important as he's been over the years. So those, I think, are the big decisions. The attacking group pretty much picks itself, but the big question, I think, that's going to define this window is going to be, how do you get the best out of Davies, David, and Larin all in the same team at the same time? That's a bit of an interesting tactical question for John Herdman to solve.
My understanding is that there's 0 chance that Arfield will be part of the Canada team this window, so that name completely out of consideration. I think that players like Tajon Buchanan will be considered. I'm hearing whispers there might be some minor injury concerns. I'm not quite sure. I haven't been able to confirm anything on that end yet, but it's something to certainly monitor as seasons wind down. And obviously there's still quarantine questions surrounding a number of players trying to get into the United States as well. So although I agree with what Ollie's putting on paper, there could be some changes around the fringes based upon injury and quarantine restrictions.
Yeah, I've got to take that into consideration these days. We also know that Canada has relocated that game against Suriname. They're playing at SEETGEEK Stadium in Chicago for that match. Gareth, is there a tactical reason for that? Why the change? Is it just logistical, timing? What's the story behind that?
Perhaps a little bit. I'm getting word that the preference was to get out of a southern climate, move north, maybe more of an East Coast vibe. And yes, things can be hot in Chicago in June, but nothing like what you experience in Bradenton, Florida. It also forces Suriname or potentially Haiti, if that's where the next round of games are, to make them travel a greater distance. Maybe the logistics for the opposition is a little bit more difficult to get there. So there might be some gamesmanship. You know, perhaps you want the game being played in a proper stadium as well, like SEETGEEK. So there's probably a number of factors, but really predominantly, I think it was getting out of the south, moving north into a place where probably Canadian players are a little bit more comfortable.
Well, they can't play at home, so they have to do everything possible when it comes to that, to their advantage, right? Well, sticking with CONCACAF region, we know that U.S. stalwart Aaron Long has suffered a torn Achilles. What kind of blow is this, Ollie, to USA?
Yeah, I really like Aaron Long, so I think it is a big blow to them. Really athletic defender, very comfortable playing in that high defensive line. I think it was very likely that it would be him and John Brooks as the starting centre-backs, you know, this summer and in World Cup qualifying in the fall and the winter as well. So he will be a loss for them, but, you know, as is the case in so many positions with this US program now, it does give the opportunity to some really interesting young players to potentially step up. There is Matt Miazga, who's a more experienced option, but I think it's more likely that they probably go to someone like Mark McKenzie, who obviously left Philadelphia after a very good season last year, now playing with Genk in Belgium and has made a good start there. And then there's Chris Richards as well, Alphonso Davies' teammate at Bayern Munich, who's gone out on loan to Hoffenheim and played regular Bundesliga minutes in the second half of this season at centre-back. So I think it'll be Brooks +1. Just an interesting question to see whether it's a more experienced player like Miazga or whether one of these young guys gets the opportunity to really start their men's national team career.
My understanding is that Chris Richards will be excluded as well through injury. So, look, I just look at the U.S. in that position. There are a lot of options, including MLS options as well. Zimmerman, Robinson. But aside from John Brooks, none of them are great. There's great depth, but there's a lot of good players, kind of like the Canadian men's national team, right? It just doesn't pick itself. Aaron Long maybe could have been possibly the best fit alongside Brooks. I don't know. I don't think it's that big of a deal when you have a country like the United States with so many options at every position.